Hello and welcome. My name is Alan. Today we are back with more. A Testament of Hope, the writings and speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today we're going to start with Conversation with Martin Luther King. So let's get into this. The blurb reads, the editor of Conservative Judaism introduced the transcription with the following headnote. On the evening of March 25th, 1968, 10 days before he was killed, Dr. Martin Luther King appeared at the 68th Annual Convention of the Rabbinical Assembly. He responded to questions which had been submitted in advance to Rabbi Gendler, who chaired the meeting. Here is a transcript of what was said that evening, beginning with the words to Professor Abraham Joshua Herschel, who presented Dr. King to the assembled rabbis. The poignant conversation took place in the afterglow of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel's introduction of Dr. King before his fellow rabbis and foreshadowed the broken civil rights alliance between many Jewish and African American leaders. Dr. Herschel. Where does moral religious leadership in America come from today? The politicians are astute, the establishment is proud, and the marketplace is busy. Placid, happy, merry, the people pursue their work, enjoy their leisure, and life is fair. People buy, sell, celebrate, and rejoice. They fail to realize that in the midst of the affluent cities, there are districts of despair, areas of distress. Where does God dwell in America today? Is he at home with those who are complacent, indifferent to other people's agony, devoid of mercy? Is he not rather with the poor and the contrite in the slums? Dark is the world for me, for all its cities and stars. If not for the few signs of God's radiance, who could stand such agony, such darkness? Where in America today do we hear a voice like the voice of the prophets of Israel? Martin Luther King is a sign that God has not forsaken the United States of America. God has sent him to us. His presence is the hope of America. His mission is sacred. His leadership of supreme importance to every one of us. The situation of the poor in America is our plight, our sickness. To be deaf to their cries, to condemn them ourselves. Martin Luther King is a voice, a vision, and a way. I call upon every Jew to hearken to his voice, to share his vision, to follow in his way. The whole future of America will depend upon the impact and influence of Dr. King. May everyone present give of his strength to the great spiritual leader, Martin Luther King. Dr. King. I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here this evening and to have the opportunity of sharing with you in this significant meeting, but I do want to express my deep personal appreciation to each of you for extending the invitation. It is always a very rich and rewarding experience when I can take a brief break from the day-to-day demands of our struggle for freedom and human dignity and discuss the issues involved in that struggle with concerned friends of good will all over our nation. And so I deem this a real and great opportunity. Another thing I would like to mention is that I have heard "We Shall Overcome" probably more than I have heard any other song over the last few years. It is something of a theme song of our struggle, but tonight was the first time that I ever heard "We Shall Overcome" in Hebrew. So that too was a beautiful experience for me to hear that great song in Hebrew. It is also a wonderful experience to be here on the occasion of the 60th birthday of a man that I consider one of the truly great men of our day and age, Rabbi Herschel. He is indeed a truly great prophet. I've looked over the last few years being involved in the struggle for racial justice, and all too often I have seen religious leaders stand amid the social injustices that pervade our society, mouthing pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious frivolities. All too often, the religious community has been a tail light instead of a headlight. But here and there we find those who refuse to remain silent behind a safe security of stained glass windows, and they are forever seeking to make the great ethical insights of our Judeo-Christian heritage relevant in this day and in this age. I feel that Rabbi Herschel is one of the persons who is relevant at all times, always standing with prophetic insights to guide us through these difficult days. He has been with us in many of our struggles. I remember marching from Selma to Montgomery, how he stood at my side and with us as we faced that crisis situation. I remember very well when we were in Chicago for the conference on religion and race. Eloquently and profoundly, he spoke on the issues of race and religion, and to a great extent, this speech inspired clergymen of all of the religious faiths of our country. Many went out and decided to do the same thing that they had not done before. So I am happy to be here with him. And I want to say happy birthday, and I hope I can be here to celebrate your 100th birthday. I am not going to make a speech. We must get right to your questions. I simply want to say that to confront a crisis, that we do confront a crisis in our nation, a crisis born of many problems. We see on every hand the restlessness of the comfortable and the discontent of the affluent, and somehow it seems that this mammoth ship of state is not moving forward or toward new and more secure shores, but toward old destructive rocks. It seems to me that all people of goodwill must now take a stand for that which is just, that which is righteous. Indeed, in the words of the prophet Amos, let justice roll down like the waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Our priorities are mixed up. Our national purposes are confused. Our policies are confused. And there must somehow be a recording of priorities, policies, and purposes. I hope as we discuss these issues tonight that together we will be able to lend or find some guidelines and some sense of direction. Rabbi Gendler. We begin now with some of the batches of questions. And since the question of confusion came up and the problem of politics, perhaps we can begin with 2 or 3 questions which are rather immediate and relate to some of the very recent developments. One question is, at this point, who is your candidate for president? One question is, if as it now seems Johnson and Nixon are nominated, do you have any suggestions as an alternative for those seeking a voice in the profound and moral issues of the day? And the third question in this general area of immediacy, would you please comment on Congressman Powell's charge that you are a moderate, that you cater to whitey, and also his criticism that you do not accept violence? Some criticism. Dr. King. Well, let me start with the first question. What is relatively easy for me, because I have followed the policy of not endorsing candidates. That is relatively easy for me because I have followed the policy of not endorsing candidates. Rabbi, somebody is saying stand, so I guess I'll have to. Rabbi Gendler. Might I say that since Dr. King anticipates a good bit of footwork next month, we thought perhaps this particular evening he could remain off his feet. Dr. King. I'll stand. On the first question, I was about to say that I don't endorse candidates. That has been the policy of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We are a nonpartisan organization. However, I do think the issues in this election are so crucial that it will be impossible for us to absolutely follow the past policy. I do think the voters of our nation need an alternative in the 1968 election, but I think we are in bad shape finding the alternative with simply Johnson on the one hand and Nixon on the other hand. I don't see the alternative there. Consequently, I must look elsewhere. I think the candidacy of both Senator Kennedy and Senator McCarthy, we see an alternative. It is not definite, as you know, that President Johnson will be renominated. Of course, we haven't had a situation since 1884 when an incumbent president was not renominated. If he wanted the nomination. But these are different days, and it may well be that something will happen to make it possible for an alternative to develop within the Democratic Party itself. I think very highly of both Senator McCarthy and Senator Kennedy. I think they are both very competent men. I think they are both dedicated men. So I would settle with either man being nominated by the Democratic Party. With the question of Congressman Powell and his recent accusation, I must say that I would not want to engage in a public or private debate with Mr. Powell on his views concerning Martin Luther King. Frankly, I hope I am so involved in trying to do a job that has to be done that I will not come to a point of dignifying some of the statements that the congressman has made. I would like to say, however, on the question of being a moderate, that I always have to understand that one what one means. I think moderation on the one hand can be a vice. I think on the other hand, it can be a virtue. If by moderation we mean moving on through the tense period of transition with wide restraint, calm reasonableness, yet militant action, then moderation is a great virtue which all leaders should seek to achieve. But if moderation means showing up in the move for justice and capitulating to the whims and caprices of the guardians of the deadening status quo, then moderation is a tragic vice which all men of good will must condemn. I don't see anything in the work that we are trying to do that in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that which is suggestive of slowing up, which is suggestive of not taking a strong stand and strong resistance to the evils of racial injustice. We have always stood up against injustices. We have done it militantly. Now, so often the word militant is misunderstood because most people think of militancy in military terms. But to be militant merely means to be demanding and to be persistent. And in this sense, I think the nonviolent movement has demonstrated great militancy. It is possible to be militantly nonviolent. On the question of appealing to Whitey, I don't quite know what the congressman means. But here again, I think this is our problem, which must be worked out by all people of goodwill, black and white. I feel that at every point we must make it clear that this isn't just a Negro problem, that white Americans have a responsibility, indeed a great responsibility, to work passionately and unrelentingly for the solution of the problem of racism, and if that means constantly reminding white society of its obligation, that must be done. If I have been accused of that, then I will have to continue to be accused. Finally, I have not advocated violence. The congressman is quite right. I haven't advocated violence because I do not see it as the answer to the problem. I do not see it as the answer from a moral point of view, and I do not see it as the answer from a practical point of view. I am still convinced that violence as the problematic strategy in our struggle to achieve justice and freedom in the United States would be absolutely impractical, and it would lead to a dead-end street. We would end up creating many more social problems than we solve, and unborn generations would be the recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness. Therefore, I think nonviolence, militantly conceived and executed, well organized, is the most potent weapon available to the black man in his struggle for freedom and human dignity. So, yeah, we'll end this episode on that part, since the next line starts with a question from Rabbi Gendler. But yeah, Dr. King addressing, that he don't see himself as just being behooved to white people who again, at this point, this is 1968. So, um, there's already been kind of a turn against Dr. King because civil rights and societal change is not happening fast enough for many African Americans. And of course, you have groups that have cropped up that are willing to use a bit more violence, if not just for self defense, like the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party has no qualms on using violence, but they use it for self defense. And Dr. King, he understood, but he felt the best way is no violence at all, whether it's in self defense or aggressively in offense, because he felt one of the biggest effects he could have was for those who fought against him in his drive for civil rights to be ashamed of their actions, especially, since they were just senselessly beating people, hurting people, killing people. But yeah. Anyway, that will be it for this episode. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.